Welcome to The Facts. I'm Mike Austad, and this week we're going to talk about the post-election issues regarding the state of South Dakota. And with me today is a guest, Jim Bolin. Jim, welcome to the program.
It's nice to be here, Mike. Thanks for the invitation.
Now, you have some experience in the legislature, and you're back again, got elected again. Tell us a little bit about your background and what the plan is in Pierre now.
First of all, I represent District 16, which is the furthest southeastern portion of the state. That's all of Union County from Beersford to the Dakota Dunes, and then the southern rural portion of Lincoln County, which is basically almost everything in Lincoln County south of Harrisburg. I've been in the legislature for 8 years. I'm a retired teacher who taught history government classes in Canton, and I've been interested in politics for a while, been able to win some of these races, and so we'll be in Pierre for another 2 years in the sessions of 2017 and 2018. And of course, the major objective of every legislative session is to produce a balanced budget for the state of South Dakota. That's our #1 goal all the time. We want to try to do that as economically and as efficiently as possible.
And you've had experience in the House side. There's 2 chambers, the House and the Senate. You've served 4 terms as a representative in that district.
That's correct.
Now you've moved to the Senate,
correct.
Won that election, so things are starting. The term doesn't start until January of this year. The sessions are always about 40 days.
That's correct.
The term begins in Pierre in January. But there's some things happening right now.
We had our leadership elections for the Senate. Those have been decided. Senator Curd will be the new majority leader. Senator Greenfield will be the new president pro tem, who's kind of the scheduler, you might say, for the Senate. And there are other individuals in some of these other positions that will represent the state of South Dakota very well.
Okay. And with the Senate pro tem and the Senate majority and the House speakership side, this might be inside lingo in the legislature, but for the people, what does that signify, and what is that for issues and bills? What is the position of the Senate pro tem or the majority in the Senate?
Well, the president pro tem is the person who, first of all, assigns people to committees. You get to make your requests, but doesn't necessarily mean you'll get everything you want. It's like a Christmas list. You might give your parents when you were a kid, you might have given them a list. You might not have gotten everything you wanted. But the president pro tem of the Senate assigns people to the committees in the Senate, and then he also is the person, when bills are filed, he's the one who assigns bills to various committees. So it's kind of a behind-the-scenes position. It's not the presiding officer in the Senate, that's the lieutenant governor, but it is an important position. The majority leader is the person who kind of moves the session along. He is the person who he or she is the person who decides how many bills will be taken up in a particular day. He kind of sets the tone, is the person who oftentimes has a lot of dealings with the media as far as a particular political party is concerned. So that's the function and the role of the majority leader, who is, again, voted on by the membership of each of the caucuses in the Senate.
Okay, very good. And each legislator in the Senate and the House, they get assigned or committees to be on.
That's correct.
Is there some committees that you are looking forward to that you would like to be on, or maybe that's going to be in the cards?
Well, I'll probably, it's not a secret or anything, I'll make a request to probably be on the Senate Education Committee because of my background. And also, I'd probably like to be a part of the Senate State Affairs Committee as well. But I'll be willing to just be on any committee that the leadership would like me to be on.
Okay. And in the state legislature, there's 105 members, 35 in the Senate, 70 in the House.
That's correct.
You're one of the 35 members.
That's correct.
And so you've been studying the nuts and bolts of the referred laws, initiated measures, and the 10 ballot measures that have gone through that were faced as a public vote that all people got to vote on last week. Tell us about some of those initiated measures. We can go through these ballot measures down the line and give us a kind of a play-by-play on what your thought is after the election, maybe describe a little bit of that. If you want, we could start with Constitutional Amendment R, This is brought on by the legislature that gives more power to the Board of Regents in directing post-secondary, the tech schools.
I'll just try to take all of these amendments real quickly. Three of them lost. TU and V all went down. T was about redistricting. We may talk about that a little bit more later. U was a measure that was put on the ballot by the payday loan industry. I think most people believe it was put on there to kind of confuse the voters, and it was decisively defeated. V was an amendment that would have removed party labels from ballots and also set up a top 2 primary without party designation. That was defeated as well. So those all lost. Now going back to R is an amendment that is the only amendment, only measure of the 10 that was put on the ballot by the legislature. The legislature, I think all your listeners need to know, the legislature cannot change the South Dakota Constitution by itself. Any constitutional change can be recommended by the legislature, passed by the legislature, then it has to go to a vote of the people. R, again, was the only one of those 10 measures that was approved by the legislature. And what R did, R is going to give not necessarily the Board of Regents, but it is going to allow the tech schools of the state of South Dakota, 4 of them, to have a separate independent board that will not necessarily be subject to the Board of Regents. Right now, the tech schools in South Dakota are governed by local school boards, and it makes it a very awkward and kind of a unusual situation for the state. And Representative Mark Mickelson was the one who really pushed through Amendment R, did a lot of work on it, and got it so that we now put this proposal forward so that we will have a new separate board that will govern the tech schools. And I know some people it passed narrowly, some people were kind of leery of that, but the tech schools are very different from the K-12 school system, and they're also very different. They have a very different mission than the colleges and universities we have here in the state. So that's why that was set up. I thought it was a necessary change. I think the public needs to know that this measure, Amendment R, which was passed by the voters, was approved by the legislature by an overwhelming margin. It only had like 2 or 3 votes in the entire legislature against it. So I'm glad it passed. I voted for it. It was a good measure. Now Amendment S, Marcy's Law, or sometimes might have called Marcy's Amendment, that also passed. I did not support that. I thought it was an unnecessary constitutional change, funded by well over $1 million by an individual from the state of California who wants these victims' rights not in law but in the Constitution. And but that one passed, and we'll have to. That will bring some changes as far as the local law enforcement and your prosecutors and your state's attorney's offices. And unfortunately, it might very well require more money to meet these requirements, because most of the requirements that are now in the Constitution were already in the laws of South Dakota.
Let's continue with more of that discussion when you come back on the 10 ballot measures voted by the people in South Dakota.
Hunting season is important to me. I only get a few precious days each year to enjoy this sport. So when it's time to get a hunting license, a rifle, shells, or optics, I only trust the guys from Badlands Gun Store. Badlands Gun Store has everything, including this new 300 Win Mag. And when the birds start flying, Badlands Gun Store has any shotgun I need to take care of my upland and waterfowl pursuits. If you value your time in the great outdoors like I do, then go to Badlands Gun Store and let their great staff take care of you.
We'd take walks and go for bike rides.
We'd wake up with aches and pains.
We used to think it's only natural that when you hit middle age, you begin to slow down a bit.
That's what we used to think.
Until we got a Comfort King.
Now we wake up energized.
We're more active.
Oh, a lot more active.
More vitality.
More flexibility.
So now that we have a Comfort King,
why slow down?
Kale Crane?
Yes, ma'am.
What's your story about?
It's about a king and his castle And a magic horse? I like him.
Her. I like her too.
I want you to help me.
What is it I'd be getting?
10%.
20.
15.
Done. You ever seen a kid so happy with a horse? Yeah, I have.
Kurt Russell, Dakota Fanning, Dreamer.
Tonight at 7 on KCPO.
Welcome back to the Facts. Jim, we were talking about some of the constitutional amendments and Marcy's Law, or Amendment S.
Really what this does is that it expands the rights of victims to include minor crimes as well. And it also, again, places it in the Constitution of the state of South Dakota, which in a sense removes any type of the ability of the legislature to make what some of us might perceive of as necessary changes.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to some of the initiated measures. These have a little more adjustability with the legislature, and they can be changed up and modified somewhat. The first one would be Initiated Measure 21, and this is an act to allow the state to maybe set prices and restrictions on interest rates for certain loans.
That's correct. This was a measure that had broad support across the state of South Dakota. I think there was a feeling, a belief on the part of many people that the payday loan industry was being very, you might say, greedy towards individuals, and in a sense almost trapping them in poverty through the rollover of loans and these type of things. There was a broad-based coalition. Many conservative church people, liberal church people, social activists, all sorts of people were on board on this. Of course, the two main individuals who were promoting it, I call them kind of the H-boys, Steve Hickey, a former member of the South Dakota legislature, and I think Steve Hildebrand is his name, who is a former campaigner for Barack Obama, a Democrat activist, who now runs this Josiah's Coffee House in downtown Sioux Falls. So there was a broad-based group of people who circulated the petitions and got this measure on the ballot, and it passed really in an overwhelming fashion. Mm-hmm. So this is going to bring some changes to the lending industry in South Dakota. The maximum annual interest rate is now 36%. And we're going to have to wait and see how this works out and develops. The payday loan people have stated that they will, once this goes into effect in just a week or so, that they will make some hard decisions as to whether they will continue their practices in South Dakota. When a measure like this was passed in Montana, payday loans ended in that particular state. So this is an issue that we're going to have to see how it all works out.
Part of the counter, the opposition to this was lots of banks, other lending institutions weren't going to deal with these people, and this was one of their few outlets to get short-term money, and they're squeezed out, and perhaps loan sharking and other more nefarious modes of lending could take advantage of people worse, as well as government intervention.
You're exactly right. There's some questions here as to how this will impact the market, and there's no doubt that sometimes people with very bad credit need money, and where are they going to get it? There's some questions about it, but again, it did have I think the strength of this measure and the reason it passed by such an overwhelming margin was that it had a broad-based support across the state of South Dakota from, again, I can't think of any church group in the state who opposed this measure. I think most church groups, either formally or informally, were in favor of this, along with a wide variety of other people. And some people just said they just don't like payday lending. So, but there will be ramifications for this in the future but we're going to have to wait and see how it all plays out.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one, which is Initiated Measure 22. This was kind of a surprise. It is 34 pages, It was a publicly funded political campaign issue brought on by many out-of-state interests for public financing of campaigns, right, along with a lot of other things in
right there. You know, first of all, there is that issue. It requires the state of South Dakota to spend in an election cycle for the legislature up to $12 million through what are called democracy credits. I know this is going to be. First of all, I think everybody needs to know it passed by a very narrow margin. The emphasis of the proponents of this measure was to use it as an anti-corruption measure, and talked about lobbyists giving gifts to legislators. I will just tell your viewers that I have received lots of no-spill coffee mugs for riding in my car. That's really about the only real gifts that I've received. Occasionally I've received a back support pillow from the Chiropractic Association and things like that. But it's the idea that the South Dakota legislature is getting all these expensive gifts and things like that. Well, that's mythology. But it did pass, and we're going to have to evaluate this. I don't really know all of the ramifications of this. I know there's going to be greater disclosure of campaign monies, although anyone can look up my campaign finance report on the Secretary of State's website. It's all listed there. There also will be set up what's called an ethics commission, and the impact of that will be very, we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. But this is controversial. It was a surprise. To me, it was the biggest surprise of election night in South Dakota that 22 passed. Again, it passed narrowly. It is a law. It is only a law. And a law, of course, laws are very important, but it is subject to further, perhaps, referral or evaluation and amendment by the legislature.
Okay, it doesn't quite have the teeth of the constitutional amendment.
That's exactly right.
It can be modified, but it's going to take some work.
That's right. The legislature does have that authority as far as a law is concerned.
Okay, very good. Let's go to another initiated measure, which is 23. This kind of sounded good. It was very brief on the description in the ballot. That's of charging private entities charging for use of their services, something along that line. What is this really getting to, and what were you surprised at this?
I was, first of all, this was a measure that was placed on the ballot by unions who primarily from Minnesota and Illinois, who put $400,000, $500,000 to get this on the ballot in the state of South Dakota. It basically would have pretty much eviscerated or negated the right to work provisions that are in South Dakota law, and I believe are in the South Dakota Constitution. It was defeated decisively. I think the people of South Dakota are very much in favor of the right to work component of the economy of the state of South Dakota. We've been a right to work state since 1947, and so this measure was, again, it was primarily funded, almost exclusively funded by people from outside the state of South Dakota, and it was defeated very decisively. The idea behind it was that you should have to, in a sense, pay someone to have a job, and public decisively defeated it.
We'll return more with a couple of initiated measures and referred laws on the facts.
It's more than a network and the cloud. It's reliable uptime and multi-layered security. It's how you stay connected to each other and to your customers. With CenturyLink, you get advanced technology solutions, including an industry-leading broadband network and cloud and hosting services, all with dedicated, responsive support. With CenturyLink as your trusted technology partner, you're free to focus on growing your business. CenturyLink, your link to what's next.
Boys, I have a really important meeting this afternoon, and there's nothing I can do. I'll be right back.
I'm sorry. Danny, where are you?
ZATHURA. This is so cool. Check this out. Will you play with me? First person to the black planet wins. meaty, meat, or eat this for me. All it says that you fat.
Adventure is waiting
Walter, check this out.
right outside your door. ZATHURA.
Sunday night at 7 on your Central Plains media station.
Welcome back to The Facts. We are continuing the discussion on the 10 ballot measures that the South Dakota voters on. Jim Bolin, I guess, with the South Dakota legislature. There are two more referred laws that were left. One is Referred Law 19, petition changes. It might be more in the baseball on timing and with the Secretary of State. Tell us a little bit about the referred law as compared to, say, a constitutional amendment, and what this petition change Referred Law 19 vote was about.
Sure. South Dakota has what's called the initiative and referendum. Not every state has this, but what these rights have for the citizens is that if the legislature passes a law and the public thinks that the legislature is not doing the right thing, they have the right to refer that by petition to the next to a vote in the next general election. Well, there were two laws that the South Dakota legislature passed in the last session. One dealing with the timing of petitions, and one dealing with youth minimum wage, that were referred by petition to the ballot. And number 9, and this is something that is pretty, occasionally this happens in South Dakota. Probably the most notable one that happened in recent history was the referral of House Bill 1234 back in 2012 to the voters. This was a major change in the educational process in South Dakota. An overwhelming number of people got signatures against it, and then it went to the ballot, and of course it was decisively defeated by the citizens. These two measures didn't get nearly as much publicity. The first one, number 19, dealt with the time frame of collecting signatures, petitions to run for public office. Back in 2014, there were numerous press reports about multiple candidates who basically were faking signatures on petitions and were out of the country when signatures were collected, and then they said that they were there to witness the signature and all of these things. So the legislature decided to change the date for the circulation of petitions from January 1st, to push everything back a month. We would start collecting signatures December 1st, be done at the end of February, instead of the current system of collecting signatures starting January 1st and going till just about the end of March. There were some other things added that would have made it a little more difficult for independent candidates to get on the ballot, but the primary motivation behind the change in the law was that it would give the Secretary of State a longer period of time to check the veracity and the legality of these signatures. Because right now, if you turn these petitions in towards the end of March, the Secretary of State has almost no time to check the veracity of the signatures, because the primary election is in early June. You have to get the ballots printed, and you also have to meet the requirement that military voters these ballots have to be sent out 45 days in advance of the primary election. So you've got to be sending ballots out. You've got to have people able to vote sometime in April. The petitions come in towards the end of March. You have almost no time in there to check the validity of these signatures. So it was put on. There were a number of people who objected to it. I think primarily because we're going to make it a little bit harder for independents to get on the ballot. it was, in the end, it was defeated. And I think there might be another effort to change some of these things around. Now, Referred Law 20 was in regards to a youth minimum wage. Back in 2014, the people of South Dakota, by a vote, I think it was about 55 to 45, decided to increase the minimum wage in the state from $7.25, I believe, up to $8.50. And there also was an escalator clause in there that would allow the minimum wage to go up automatically. The first year it went up a nickel. This last year it went up a dime. So now the minimum wage in South Dakota as of January 1st of 2017 will be $8.65 an hour, which is really probably below almost any wage that's paid in the city of Sioux Falls. But it is it's probably a little bit more than what people might want to pay out in small towns like Faulkton and Miller and you know, different communities, Selby, some of these other communities a long ways from South Dakota. The public, in this case, also decided to vote no on this and to leave it as it is. I think this is a good idea, so that that we would have a lower wage for teenagers. Once you get to be the age of 18, you're immediately considered an adult. But the public in this case decided not to vote this down. And it's kind of interesting, when a law is referred to the ballot, if you want to keep the law and approve of what the legislature did, you have to vote yes. But in this election, and I think one of the reasons some of these measures went down, some of them were defeated very decisively, I think the public in this instance, there were so many things on the ballot, Mike, that the public, unless they were absolutely sure of something, they were greatly influenced by overwhelming advertising, they just voted no. And so both of these measures, 19 and 20, were defeated. I don't think they were nearly as significant as some of the other measures that were on the ballot, such as our constitutional amendments, and such as 21 and 22. And 21, 22, and 23, I believe, were in reality far more significant than 19 and 20. So they went down. We'll have to maybe try to rework them and get them approved so that they're not referred next time.
Okay. South Dakota's being a smaller state. Advertising is more affordable,
sure,
especially to outside interests out of state. We see more amendments and ballot measures getting on. It does circumvent the legislature in some ways.
Absolutely.
And it's easier to get smaller number of petition signatures, smaller number. What can we do to maybe keep that balance of outside input, but also have the legislature be able to handle these issues more effectively?
Right. Well, that's a great question. A lot of people have talked about this. I do think that in this next legislative session, there is going to be some efforts led by a number of people who would like to make it, to change the requirements, not so much for initiated measures, but for constitutional amendments. Having 5 constitutional amendments on the ballot with only one being placed there by the legislature, I think was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people. So I do think that in this next legislative session, you might very well see an effort made to change some of the requirements. I know Colorado, in this last election that just took place about a week ago, they passed an amendment to their constitution that put a geographical requirement on signatures, which means that you can't just get all the signatures from Sioux Falls and Rapid City like most of these people do today, come in from out of state. And they've hired workers that come in to get these signatures. Instead of that, you'd have to get signatures in Yankton, you'd have to get signatures in Watertown, you'd have to get signatures in Pierre, all across the state of South Dakota. So there are a number of ways of approaching this. I know Montana has had this requirement for many years, that there has to be a geographical balance as far as the signatures are concerned. Because this is a problem, but I know that a number of people are thinking about the issue at the present time.
Tune in next week for more of The Facts.
heard the truth. No, but I wanted the answers.
You are the only one I trust.